Hi everyone, I'm Kiel Gilleade, research engineer at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. My colleague, Ruby, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, Ruby Mendenhall, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, in sociology, African American studies, and also the College of Medicine.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about a study we conducted a few years ago, looking at how we can use wearable sensors to measure the impacts of gun crime on Black mothers' experience, of people living in Chicago, specifically Englewood, and how we can create public display, how we can create, public artworks from the type of study data. I'm going to talk specifically a bit later about that. So this, you can see very nice little pinwheels are something I spotted, when I was walking out and about, in Champaign. And one of the things that kind of point to the type of stuff that we've been interested with our research study is each one of these, beautiful little windmills are actually representative, part of something called the Pinwheel Project, and actually representative of trauma. So each one of these actually represents a single child, who has been abused, and is currently in, being taken care of. And it's you've got this contention between, this very beautiful artifact, it's very nice presentation, draws your eye, but when you get into the thing, the realization of what it actually represents, it really has that type of impact, emotional impact, and gets you to understand the trauma that it represents. And what we're going to talk about today, as I say, is a study looking at wearable sensors, where we conducted a pilot study looking at, how we can use wearable sensors to document people's experiences of gun crime. And the art exhibit that the exhibit we created from it. So we created a range of, exhibits to communicate these type of experiences to people who don't normally connect with these experiences. So the idea of this project was looking at new ways of, communicating trauma in a way that would get people to understand. And the way that we did this in this particular case was taking our study data from the wearable data and looking at creating public displays, public artworks to communicate these, these experiences. So,
yeah,
Ruby?
Thank you. And so, well, thank you for inviting me to talk about our project. And so part of what Kyle talked about communicating experiences is about racial trauma and so much of what's happening today. And so I just put these images. This is my grandmother here at a talk with Dr. King, and then this is her sister. And just to illustrate the 400 years of racial trauma, followed by Jim Crow, and followed by many of the inequalities that we see today, and how that manifests in residential segregation and other ways is what the study is trying to capture, and the consequences of that. Next slide, please. And so when you think about, so Jim Crow and other things, and now what we're seeing, COVID-19, where African Americans represent about 30% of the Chicago population, but about 39% of the COVID cases, and then almost 70% of those who are dying, and Latinx individuals, and also American Indians are experiencing this. And again, that's part of the racial trauma that has occurred. And so we also see some of the unrest today is a result of Breonna Taylor's death, who was shot 8 times by police. And then also Ahmaud Arbery in May, who was shot while running. And we see down in the corner with George Floyd, and what his family describes as a modern day lynching, and all the protests. And this was several days ago. So we're seeing more and more, not just in the US, but across the country. And then, and on top of that, so we talk about, there's the COVID-19 pandemic, and then there's the pandemic within the pandemic in terms of African American and other groups of color dying at higher rates. And then in Chicago, there's also the gun violence epidemic. And so the rates of gun violence are up this year. So all of this trauma, and we're trying to capture how it's manifested in terms of health, and then also how we can communicate that trauma to the larger community. And so as also when you think about trying to communicate it, you think about The Other America, written by Michael Harrington, where he was trying to show the US that in the midst of affluence after the war, that there was still this group where there was this hidden poverty, both in Appalachia, but also in urban America. And then in 2012, Ford, who was a correspondent with ABC News, they started this series about a hidden America, and really trying to show how there are individuals, mostly African-American mothers, who were raising children in levels of unfathomable violence. And so it's interesting now, in terms of the hidden America, in terms of these processes, they are on the news, right? You see it playing out, the anger and the rage over this 400 years of racial trauma. And so what we'll talk about today is an extension of the Black Mothers South Chicago Resiliency Project. Started with 2 focus groups, and then we did 96 interviews just asking mothers, what is it like to live in neighborhoods with high levels of violence? How do you protect your mental health? How do you protect the mental health of your children? Of the mothers, about 48% reported depressive symptoms, and about 56% reported PTSD symptoms. In terms of how the stress was affecting their physical health, they talked about having headaches, backaches, stomach aches, hair falling out, panic attacks, a loss of sexual appetite, or sexual desire, just the range of, again, consequences from the stress. And then also we looked at genomic findings. We asked the mothers, could we take some of their blood? And we were surprised, right? We thought with so much of racism in the medical system that they would say no, but they gave their bloods, and they were interested in how stress was affecting them. And so we saw that subjective stress, where they felt like their neighborhood was threatening to themselves and their children, how it had a negative effect on the genes regulating their immune system. And so just a quote from it. Pseudonym is Angie, and she says, my kids have seen people shot. My kids have friends who have been shot. My kids' friends have died. It's not just only stress for adults, it's a lot on the kids. Kids ask you a lot of questions. And so I asked her, so how do you respond? And how do the kids respond? And she said they were scared for a long time, crying a lot for a long time, and they didn't want to go nowhere. And when she talked about this, she talked about counseling at the schools, and she put up quotes, and she said she called like 3 times to get the kids counseling, but she was always told to call back. So again, this unprocessed trauma is also an issue, and I argue it's some of what we're seeing play out today. And so some of the goal of this study was to have participants use the wearable sensors to document the impact of the gun crime on their health, and this was in Englewood. And so we wanted to develop the data visualizations to really give the mothers and others tools to talk to their legislators, talk to policymakers and others about community violence and how that affected their health.
Okay, so I'm going to take over here just to go over the study. So I'm going to quickly go over the design of the pilot study and the data collected, and then we're going to have a discussion of several of the exhibits, several installations of the exhibits that we created and the inspiration behind them. So when it came to the study, we performed a 30-day pilot study involving 15 Black mothers from Englewood. We were using biosensors and mobile apps to track physical, mental, and emotional states, as well as their physical location, in order to get a semblance of the type of gun crimes they were exposed to. We're using a system called ShotSpotter. ShotSpotter is a series of microphones that are installed in in neighborhoods in Chicago, which are supposed to track where gunfire occurs from. We're also going to use other data sets from the police, as well as 911 calls to track location of gun violence. And the whole idea of this is see if we can integrate these data sets to measure short and long-term the short and long-term impact of gun exposure on individuals. We were using our subject's personal smartphone to help improve ecological validity. Sensors were all selected based on the suitability for our study duration and environment. And one of the big things of this project to make it a success was making sure we were making sure we were using existing community relations and having very strong subject buy-in. That was very important for that, given the subject matter and obviously highly personalized data collection. So the equipment we used, Android smartphones, Fitbit Charge 2, a device called the E4, which is like a F1 version of a Fitbit. We're using for tracking diary experiences, Journey for Android, also using a physical diary. And to track physical location, we're using GPS Logger for Android. Our crime data sets were ShotSpotter, 911 service calls, and police incident reports. These all track, when it comes to 911 service calls and police incident reports, these give a rough idea of where particular types of crime have been reported by the public and where police have been dispatched. So the data that we collected, at the end we had 12 participants complete the study, 11 with the Fitbit, 1 with the E4. We have location data, diary data. When it came to the crime data, at the time that we built this exhibit, we had the 911 service calls and police incident reports. We also had, collected workshop drawings. So these were done by our participants as a reflection on gun crime and the study as a whole. And I'll quickly give you an example of one of these. So this is, one of the reflections drawn by one of our participants. And she's indicating that, that one of her, the parks for her kids is just a complete no-go for her. There's too much crime, I can't go there. Whereas further down the road, there is, a good place for this. And when we actually looked up, the location of these, it was quite, startling that, maybe a block or two between the two parks, that one is a complete no-go and one is, is fine to approach. So when it came to gun crime, we conducted the study in 2017 in September to October in the 7th Police District, which covers West Englewood and Englewood. During that time, there were 262 reports of people sighted with a gun on the 911 system, 191 reports of shot fired, and 42 reports of person has been shot. And here is some visualization of this. This is all the 911 calls for that period for a person sighted with a gun. The area of, Police District 11, where you're seeing the hotspot, is Harrison, which is the west of downtown Chicago. This is shots fired. In Police District 11 and Police District 10 and 14, which are Ogden and Shakespeare. As you can see, if I flip back, if we're looking at 7, which is our target area, there is a small, there is a hotspot there. And then we go with persons with shots. Again, Police District, Police District 11, and also Police District 7 and 3, 7 being Englewood, and 3 is Grand Crossing. And here are some of the diary experiences of our participants. So I'll just give you a quick, read one of these. Gunshots were heard about 30 minutes ago. To think my kids would have been outside if it wasn't a school day. And I will just leave, so twice this evening, there have been gunshots. Both times, my children ran in their room to lie down on the floor and were reluctant to come out. Going through the diaries, there were lots of, experiences like this. So there is, unfortunately, a lot of trauma from gunfire and crime. So when it comes to the installations, after the study data is how do we translate the trauma that we collected from wearable data and how do we express that in a way, that can be used to communicate to stakeholders. So here is, some of the installations we created. We're going to only talk about 3 of them in this, but if anyone's interested, I can talk about these in Discord about the additional ones we created. So this is one of the first ones we created, which is called 3 Lights and 3 Numbers. And when we were actually, when we hearkened to the idea of actually creating an exhibit, one of the first discussions were, can we do something with a big red light? And I think it was a general puzzlement as what can we do with a big red light? I mean, big red lights we were thinking of is the connotations of what is it that you associate with. I'm not sure what the equivalent for US audience, but for the UK, it will be the blues and twos, whereas it for police sirens. And it's something we can do with that. So one of the things the concepts we wanted to work with was the 911 call data. So the gunshot information. So what is it? Person with a gun, shots fired, and person has been shot. And this started obviously debate about, who are the stakeholders, what experience did we want to convey, and what did we want the stakeholder to take away from, the artifacts that we could create from this data set. Some of the interesting things, if we go back right to the first slides about, the trauma with the pinwheels, the idea of here is a beautiful artifact, but the message it conveys is very powerful because it's contrasting this beauty, but there's trauma behind it. And the idea of, and there's also a piece by, Lily by Charlotte Madison that I particularly, like the design of, was the idea of converting ACE's data and her own experiences into a very beautiful flower. That insects, represent, different elements of, of trauma. So the whole idea of subversive design entered the discussion. But then comes the question of how do you carefully convey trauma respectively without without traumatizing the audience or re-traumatizing your subject, of the data themselves. And again, it comes to big red lights. Can we do something interesting with this? 911 data with the idea of representing things through lights? One of the things we put together was this, I've got actually some smart lights and I've been playing around with them. And the idea was to represent each 911 call representing to gun crime as a particular light, and then replay our entire data set, to get a sense of the temporal nature of the 911 calls that were coming into Englewood. So we would have blue lights representing when person has, been sighted with a gun, yellow indicating when gunfire has occurred, and red when someone, unfortunately has been shot. And so we created a system, a system for that. And it gives, as I say, people a sense of the temporal nature of these calls and the type of call activity they expect in the area across time. And I have a quick demo of this, of the demo. I will send a link in Discord, which is a bit better because when I tested this in Zoom, it did not work as well. But here is the test video. I'll run for about 30 seconds just to give you a sense of what's going on. So that's just indicated there has been a 911 call indicating person sighted with a gun. And one of the interesting things that came across when we demoed this to our research group before we further developed it was the tension that it builds, of the silence between each call, and then suddenly everything, can just turn its head. So 3 people have just been, reported, person's been, sighted with been shot, and there's been a gunfire. So I'm going to stop there for time. As I say, I will put this into the Discord for people to have a look. There we go. And this was our setup, our exhibit setup. With the 3 lights, in a triangle formation where people could look around, and get a sense of the space and the course that were happening. So, Ruby?
Yeah, so I'll just quickly talk about, we also did an exhibit called Shots Fired. And what we did was we created an exhibit that had strings for each gunshot or shots fired, right? People calling 911 saying that they heard shots. And so these were all the ways we were thinking about how could we show the impact and the consistency of gun violence. And next slide. And so that's just us putting it together with the community, and they gave us input. So you'll see this was our original model. And I have a story about Jeff Uke from Home Depot, who was helping me and was very helpful. I can tell you that story in the Q&A session. Next slide. Next slide. Keep going, I'll just show them the final. Yeah, and so here it is, and you'll see We debated whether to do bullets, but we decided not to traumatize people who may have experience with gun violence. So these are just kind of linchpins. And the red strings represent individuals, according to 911, who have actually been shot. And we did a comparison with Lincoln Park on the north side, mostly white, affluent, versus Englewood that have high levels of Blacks. And so you can see the difference in the numbers. Sorry,
it's the bottom right one.
Oh, say that again.
The bottom right image is the setup.
Okay.
So the bottom right image, sorry, is the Lincoln Park versus Englewood.
Yes, and so and go to the slide with the numbers. Right, and so you'll see there were 191 calls about shots fired in Englewood with 42 people shot. Again, that's the red strings. And then in Lincoln Park, and this is 30 days, there were 21 calls with 0 people shot. So to just kind of demonstrate that difference in lived experience, and again, to connecting it to what's happening today, right? The trauma, discrimination, the consequences of it.
Yeah, I just want to quickly add to that. Whereas the 911 system where we created with the lights demo was about temporal nature, whereas where you can get the sense of what was happening on a moment-to-moment basis. The shots fired exhibit was showing the totality of all the data at once. And when we were comparing Englewood with Lincoln Park, you could see because when you look, an observer when you first came to see the image, you have this beautiful piece, a string piece of multiple colors representing the 911 calls. But as soon as you realize the context of that data, again, with the Pinwheel project, you start realizing the trauma. Whereas you look at Lincoln Park, because really much gun crime occurs there, as a artistic art piece, it's kind of drab. There's nothing really there, and it looks kind of terrible. But then it hits you. There's not much trauma there. That is what it's representing. Okay. So this was our VR piece, which was put together by a team of students, from our VR course at the university. And the idea was to take the data, all the data, and try to create an interactive experience where people could explore the data in pseudo real time. And some of the inspirations for this I'll quickly go through is I've always fascinated about what stories can we tell from in VR, and I was really curious about whether we could do something with our study data, and the opportunity came up to actually build something like this. One of my favorite pieces of looking experiences is a program called Notes on Blindness, which is about a blind person talks about their experiences of the world through sound, and the VR experience visualizes that. In these very muted these blue particles. And so we were looking at the type of stories we could tell. So the worksheets provided, stories from our participants. Here is another story about where one of our subjects, she's happiest when she's home. It's our own castle, and looking, when we're thinking about ways we could incorporate that into our VR experience. Some of the concepts were quickly bandied around, visualization of personal exposure to crime, and looking at, things like dispatch, which is a 911, it tells a story of a 911 dispatcher, and has its own particular way of visualizing an experience. Other VR concepts, I'm a great fan of What Remains of Edith Finch, and looking at these very personal stories. Let's quickly go through that. And what we ended up doing is merge a bunch of group and individual stories into our VR experience. And the idea was to create a facsimile of Englewood, and as best we tried to describe it, as a meditative aesthetic for the powerful stories that were presented, and have some type of interactive element, as long with some type of animation of the environment based on the study data. So some of the ideas we were banding around for interactive memories. Some of our inspirations was a game called Where Thoughts Go. On your right, you can see some of the early demo work. The team logo is a butterfly. The idea was to have stories told by the women in their journals, represented by butterflies, allowing you to interact with them. The world environments, obviously we're going from some pseudo low polygon res type thing. Left is our mood board. The right is some of the early screenshots of the system. And what we ended up was 3 types of things that we wanted to do. We wanted to, again, play with the 911 surface calls. In this case, we ended up building traffic lights that were coded to our red light, yellow light, blue light, representing the different types of 911 for gun crime, looking at ways of representing the biodata we collected. My background is actually playing around with wearable sensors and looking at ways of visualizing that data set. So we're looking at, can we do something with the group data set? Can we see this? Can we see interesting things in the data of our participants who are going through this trauma? And then we're looking at the personalized stories, which unfortunately we didn't get time to implement. But the idea of turning house lights on and off according to whether during our real-time replay, whether someone was within their house or not. So this is design of the BioGarden. As I say, I do a lot of biodata representation. Here's me in my much younger days, going a little bit artistically mad. And the idea was to create a garden, to represent people's heart rate. So the idea, blue if you're asleep, green, if you're normal and awake, yellow, orange, red if you are very physically active, or you have a high rate perhaps for emotional cognitive reasons. Okay, and this is some early prototyping of our BioGarden. And I'm going to play, and I hope it works, a demo. And I'm going to quickly skip through this. Again, I will put this on the Discord channel. Skip through here. Okay, so each of these butterflies that are flying around represents a story. The traffic lights that are flickering in the background are actually representing 911 calls. This is all, as I say, playing in pseudo real time. It's about 30 minutes to go through 30 days worth of data. Participants selected a memory and to read them. So we're going through our day and night cycle. And the impressive thing to see on this one, let's just skip over here, is the BioGarden. So each one of these plots represent one of our participants and what their heart was doing at the time. Red being high heart rate, blue being very low heart rate. And you can see the 24-hour timer over there. And the idea was to get a semblance of what the group was doing. So when it gets into the day, into the night cycle, you should see, most people going with their flowers becoming less active and becoming more blue, representing that they are, going to sleep. But you'll see these sporadic parts where people have woken up in the middle of the night. They're up and about, they may have shift work, they might be stressed. Obviously, some people had, trauma that makes it very difficult to sleep. One of the interesting things we were interested in.
Yeah, and the mothers talked a lot about not being able to sleep at night. Yeah.
So a few quick concluding thoughts before we go. One of the things that was interesting for this project, especially for me, I'm a Brit. I have no experience of gun crime until I moved to the States, where unfortunately there have been 2 of these gun crimes within my neighborhood. Developing out your cultural background or lived experience needs to be undertaken with incredible care and empathy. It's one of the things that we really wanted to get right on this. And one of the what's interesting in the project is looking at the different ways that the same data presented in different form factors to convey different messages. So you saw the 911 data, we loaded up in 3 different ways. And there were actually a couple of other ways that we tried to represent it, but looking at different ways of getting people to understand it. And when we actually did the exhibit and we were asked, looking for feedback, you did get that interest about people understanding data through the different ways it was expressed. Mm-hmm. I just want to say, acknowledge all the people who've worked on this team. And thank you very much. Ruby, do you have anything to end with?
And especially in CSA, right? To allow me as a social scientist to work with Kyle has been really good. I love interdisciplinary work where you create something that's way beyond what you would have done individually. And I thought this was an amazing example of that. And as Kyle mentioned, when we did the exhibit in the community that we collected the data from, the women and people who came by were really moved and touched and really seemed as though they were able to understand what it's like, right? This unfathomable nature of a hidden America. So this was a great experience. Thanks.
Thank you very much.